My name is Berit Johannesson, and I'll be the host during the session. And we have Jonathan, who's going to be presenting on the content for today. So John, at this point, will you go to the next slide? So we have some really exciting announcements. The first is with our form builder. So for those of you who've been building forms for a good amount of time, or at least in the last year, we've had our older version, which we often refer to as our classic form builder, and we've had our upcoming form builder, which had the beta tag on it. So this upcoming week on November 1st, we're going to be taking that beta tag off the form builder, and we're going to have it so that every time you go under the form builder section, under the Forms tab, you'll be brought to the new and improved form builder. For those of you who are very accustomed to using the classic version, that still will be available to you for the next couple of months as we figure out if there's any other kinks with the new and improved form builder. So do not fret, you will have access to that later on. On November 9th, we have our special topic webinar. This is one that John's working on with our colleague Ben Ray, and they're going to demonstrate Zerion end-to-end solutions. So going from the mobile data collection side of the process all the way to the end of your process, whether it means having reports or dashboards or going into other databases. So it's going to be a really exciting special topic webinar, and I urge you to sign up to attend. The webinar we have a week after that on November 16th is data collection for project managers. So as a project manager, how can you improve your iFormBuilder projects and make them so that they're more successful? We also wanted to point out if you are someone who is currently using a free account, the deadline for using that free account is on December 1st. So at that point, you'll have to upgrade to a paid account, and we're happy to point you in the right direction or have you connect to the right person on our team so that you can do that upgrade. And then also in December, we have our data management and integration webinar on really how to take the iFormBuilder data and integrate it in new ways. So continuing with these announcements, if you've logged into iFormBuilder.com or ZerionSoftware.com, you probably will have seen that we've had a facelift, and this happened in the last week. And with that, if you go to iFormBuilder.com, you'll see brand new content, you'll see new customer stories, and you'll see that it's a very easy web page to navigate through and to get some information. There's also some perks in there where you can start following the blog and really learn more about the team as you need to. And with the ZerionSoftware.com, if you haven't checked that out, I urge you to check that out today at some point if you can. And that goes through the Zerion solutions, end-to-end solutions, and some of the other Zerion products that we have available to you and your team to make you successful. And the last one is the Customer Success Center. We've also had a facelift to that as well. Joe and team have worked really hard to try to set it up so you can find the articles that you need right away, especially as we continue to grow and add new products. Now, before I hand it over to John for today's session, we just want to learn a little bit about you, and we're going to launch a quick poll here. And if you don't mind answering it, just let us know what your experience has been with iFormBuilder so far, if you're a current user or if you're still relatively new, or if you're someone who's just looking at the platform and kind of trying to gauge the possibility that you have with it. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and hand it over to you, John. But just to give you an idea, I wanted to share with you that about 22% have been using iFormBuilder for a while, 44 are still relatively new, and 33 plan to be a FormBuilder user soon.
Sounds great, Barrett. Thank you for the announcements and thanks for the introduction. And welcome everyone to Form Building 102 using smart controls. As Barrett said, my name is Jonathan and I will be presenting today. I am a solutions and training engineer here at Zerion Software along with Barrett, and I'm glad to see that we have a nice mix of folks here on this webinar. People who have been using iForm for a while, and then people who are relatively new, and also people who are interested in joining our team and using our platform. So today what we're going to be going over is we're going to be covering the topic that we call smart controls. And smart controls are basically going to be the techniques and the mechanisms available to you in order to enhance your forms further beyond just taking a standard paper form and digitizing it so that you're collecting it on your mobile device. Smart controls are going to enable you to do a lot of different things with your forms that are really going to enhance that data collection process. So during the webinar, the first thing we'll do is we'll talk at a high level about the different smart controls that are available, what they offer for you, and what you can do with them. Afterwards, we're going to actually take the form that I presented last webinar, last month, on an elevator inspection form. It was a 3-form data collection piece. We're going to review that, and we're also going to talk about our plan for enhancing that project using smart controls. And then finally, after that, I'll go ahead and walk you through the enhanced version of the form, show you where I've implemented the smart controls, and then talk about how I implemented them and how you can extend these techniques to your own projects as well. So the first thing is, when we talk about smart controls are going to enable you to do a variety of different things. You're going to be able to do things like pre-fill your element fields. You're going to be able to reduce the amount of error you have when the collectors are getting data. You're also going to be able to give them meaningful feedback with any fields that they may have missed. You're able to restrict the visibility of some fields, so if you want a field to be hidden from the data collector, you can go ahead and do that. And you're also able to incorporate skip logic in your forms, which means that if you have a form where, for example, it says, if the answer is yes, go to question 4, otherwise go to question 5, you can do things like that within within iFormBuilder using smart controls. And then finally, you're able to set up what we call lookup tables or smart table search with smart controls, and that allows you to use a table or a form almost as a local database for you to look up and pull data from. And all of this is written using JavaScript for the syntax. And I'd actually like to open up a poll now to go ahead and see how familiar people are with smart controls. And so the poll is just going to ask you how often you're using smart controls currently in your forms on a scale of 1 to 5. And sharing the results, it looks like we have about 20%, so about a fifth of the group never use smart controls, and the majority of the viewers use them sometimes. Now, going back to what smart controls are, we talked about kind of what you can do with them, and now what I want to do is take that and translate it into what we actually do in our platform and how we phrase everything. So the first type of smart control we offer is what we call dynamic values. And a dynamic value is going to allow an element to have a default value. It's also going to allow you to take that element and have its value be based on another element's value. This is going to be useful for doing things like calculations. You're able to also take one field and use it for another field's input. And also, if you have a field that you want to have a default value for example, if you have a read-only element where the user is not going to be able to enter a value, you can use the dynamic value field to give that element its data. And for also each one of these smart controls, I just want to kind of go over the format of these next couple slides. I'm going to have a brief introduction as well as a couple tips and tricks. And then also I'm going to have more resources for you so that when you get the recording of this and you also get the PDF documents, you're able to use this as a reference and as a resource in your form building moving forward. The next smart control we offer are called condition values. And a condition value is going to enable an element to be hidden, so it cannot be altered. And condition values are also going to enable you to use skip logic, which is where you're going to be using the condition value to base the visibility from the value of another element. And so the main tip and trick I want to share with this is within the condition value field, you can use the word false to hide an element. And also when we're working with option lists, you can use the ZC display key, which is a built-in function within iFormBuilder, to use the option list key value rather than its index. The next smart control we offer is called client validation, and this is really a two-pronged smart control. The first portion of this smart control is going to be the actual validation mechanism, which is going to help you prevent improper inputs. So for example, if you want to enter a numeric value that cannot be negative, you can set the validation accordingly so that if the user enters a negative value, the form will not be able to be submitted. The second part of your client validation is going to be the validation message. And so in this, you can customize the message to instruct your data collectors on not only where they made a mistake on their data collection form, but you can also aid them in helping them fill it in with a proper value. For your tips and tricks with client validation, the biggest one here is that the message that you type in has to be between quotation marks. So because we're writing in JavaScript, if you just want to write a plain message to the data collector, it has to be within quotation marks for it to run properly. And I'll go ahead and show you an example of that in a little bit. The fourth smart control we offer is what we call our smart table search, or a lookup table. Smart table searches are going to allow the form to look up values from a local database. When you're working with your smart controls, your smart table search, it's going to behave similar to a pick list. And for those of you who are new to iFormBuilder or may not be very comfortable with all of the different elements, a pick list is just the element where you are able to select one value from a list of predefined options. So when you connect your smart table to your form, the possible values for that record to look them up are going to show up as a pick list, and then you can select the one from this. This is different than the behavior before, where it used to show up as a text field and you would have to type in the exact match. Now, if you prefer the previous behavior, you can actually use that behavior still by typing in the key value disable_list inside the element reference ID 1 for that field. And the other nice thing I like to point out is that when you're populating your local database for a smart table search, you're actually able to do that by uploading a CSV file. So if you want to preset your data for that local database, you can do that offline or outside of the platform and then upload that CSV file, and it's going to be a much faster process. The final smart control I want to go over is our page-level JavaScript. And this is actually my favorite one to talk about. I feel like this is one that offers a great deal of power and flexibility in your form building. But page-level JavaScript is going to allow you to define custom functions, and it's also going to allow you to write larger blocks of JavaScript code for using your smart controls. And one of the big tips and tricks I like to talk about with this one is that whenever you're writing page-level JavaScript, we recommend that you put the page-level JavaScript in the uppermost parent form. So you don't necessarily need to place that JavaScript within the form with its element, but if you put it in the parent form, the uppermost parent form, then you're ensured to have the page-level JavaScript function properly. And the other nice thing about writing page-level JavaScript, especially when you define your own custom functions, is that you're able to write a function that does many different things and use that code and that process repeatedly in a very easy process, an easy fashion. And I'm also going to show you about that later on. Now, kind of sitting on top of all of those smart controls, one other piece of information I like to give people is that if you want to take statements and combine them, say you want to check if the score is going to be equal to one of two values, whether it's equal to 1 or the number 2, you're going to use what's called the double pipe to set up an OR relationship. And so what that means is if either one of the statements is true, then the overall expression will evaluate to true. Conversely, if you set up your two statements and you separate them with the double ampersand, this establishes an AND relationship. Within an AND relationship, both statements need to be true in order for the overall expression to evaluate to be true. So in the given example I have typed here, if I put in a score of 200, 200 is greater than 0, so that first statement evaluates true. However, 200 is not less than or equal to 100. So because the second statement is false, the overall expression will evaluate to false. The third notation I'd like to go over also is that using the exclamation point in conjunction with the equal sign, this is going to set up a not equal to relationship. So I'm checking to see if the score is not equal to the value of 5. I've also put together here a list of articles that may be helpful for you to be used as reference. Some of these articles are going to talk about the smart controls from a high level. Other ones are going to be specific use cases for problem solving things that you may have or that may come up during your form building projects. And then finally on this slide, the last two links. The first one for w3schools.com. I find this website to be an excellent resource, especially if you may be new to working with JavaScript or have limited experience. They have a lot of real good tutorials on there. They also have environments where you can test it out and you can manipulate and play with the code a little bit to see how it will affect the way it changes. And the final link on here is for a web platform called JS Fiddle, and this is another good tool to use when you're developing your JavaScript. It's helpful to test your JavaScript while you're writing it, so that when you start to push that into iFormBuilder, you're going to have less errors that you run into. And at this point, actually, Barrett, I'd like to take a second to see if there are any questions that have been raised so far.
Hi, John. Not too many questions. Just there's one or two coming in about smart controls as a whole, but I have a feeling those are going to be answered once you start showing off the form itself and showing what you've been able to do. Definitely people are highly interested in seeing the process, though.
Sounds great. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about our basic form, and then we're going to go into the planning of how we're going to enhance that with smart controls. So just to review, the basic form that I went over last webinar is going to be an elevator inspection form. There are 3 forms to this. The first part, the parent form, is going to have 2 select fields for the type of elevator and the type of inspection, as well as 2 subforms, one for building information and one to do the actual inspection inside of the elevator car. And let me go ahead and show you real quickly what this form looks like. So here you'll see the first parent form, and there are 2 select lists at the top. The first one is going to be for the unit type, and the second form the second element is going to be for the inspection type. So if it is an acceptance type, that would be for an initial inspection, or if it's a periodic type, that would be for something like an annual inspection. The building information subform, which I'm pulling up now, is going to have things like your building name, address, phone number, representative, unit ID, manufacturer, the speed, and the capacity. And I'm not going to go ahead and fill this in just for the sake of time, but I do want to note that in the slides I do have a link to the form package, so if you would like to download this form and play around with it, you're able to do that after the webinar. The second subform and the third final form within this is just going to be a long list of select statements, basically checking each inspection point to see if it passes, if it fails, or if it's not applicable. And there are 19 total inspection points here. And for these ones, I'm going to quickly fill these in because they're all required. So we're just going to assume that we have a really good elevator and it has passed everything. Click on done, and then I have completed this record. I can sync my device, and that record is pushed up to my dedicated database. Now, to enhance this form, we're going to be making a couple of changes, and we're going to be making changes to each of the forms themselves. For the parent form, we're going to be using built-in iFormBuilder functions to access the user information. Specifically, I want to put my name down as the inspector, and that name is going to be associated with my user that I log into. We're then going to be using dynamic values to auto-populate a read-only element. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the current date as the date of the inspection, and I'm using this as a read-only element so that the data collector cannot alter that value. And finally, in this form, we're going to be using skip logic. So what we're going to be doing is based on one of the option list values, we're either going to show a field or we're going to keep it hidden. So you're effectively skipping that element. For the building information form, we're going to be doing 2 things. we're going to be adding client validation for both the unit speed as well as the capacity. And for each one of those elements, we're also going to be giving meaningful feedback through the validation message when the user types in an incorrect value. The final changes we're going to make are to the car inspection form. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to write a page-level JavaScript function to calculate an inspection score. Specifically, what I want to do is I want to count the number of passes or the number of fails or the number of not applicables. And because that process is very similar for all three of those, what I did was I wrote a JavaScript function so I can use that function and repeat that process without having to type it all over again. And finally, we're also going to be using our condition value to control the visibility of these three score fields. Because there's nothing for the inspector to enter into them, we're not going to even bother showing them on the form to keep it a little bit cleaner. So now we're going to go one form at a time, and I'm going to go ahead and show you the enhanced form as well as talk about the changes that we make for each one of them. So for the first parent form, the elevator inspection, you'll notice it looks a little different to begin with. First of all, I have these two fields at the top for the inspector name and the inspection date, and both of these fields are read-only. The inspector name is done using the iForm built-in functions, which I'll show you the statements for after this. And then the inspection date is also using the dynamic values to create a date object and display it. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and say that the unit type is a passenger elevator. And now you're going to see the skip logic in action, where if it is an acceptance inspection type, we're going to continue on with our form and fill it out. However, if this inspection is periodic, what I would like to know is when the last inspection was. So I can go ahead and fill this out. We'll choose a date here to select. And again, this field only shows if I choose periodic for my inspection type. Now, going back through those, that first field, inspector name. What I'm doing here is, within the dynamic value, I'm using the iFormBuilder built-in functions to access both my first name as well as my last name. And so those first and last names are associated with my username for when I log into the device or if I log into my web portal. And so when the user information is sent here, we can populate the dynamic value with that. In between these two built-in functions, you'll see the plus signs as well as two quotation marks. And what I want to point out there is that there's actually a space in between those quotation marks, and that is the space that you see in my form between my first and last name. So this space here is created by joining the empty space between my first name and my last name. These plus signs are the JavaScript's operators to do what's called concatenation. And concatenation is basically when you're taking two text values, which we call strings, and you're effectively gluing them together is the way I like to describe it. So I'm taking my first name, gluing a space to the end of it, and then gluing my last name to the end of that space. So altogether, I get my full name. For the inspection date, within the dynamic value, I'm going to call the date function. And so I use the word capital D, ATE, and an open and close parentheses. And the date function is actually built into the JavaScript library. So that's nothing that we wrote. But what will happen is iForm is set to take that date, and it will then render it as the current day when the form loads. And so again, going back to what my form looks like, you'll see this date function has now been displayed in the read-only as saying it's Wednesday, October 26th, 2016. The last change we made to this form is the skip logic using our option lists. And so what I did here was, for that last inspection field, the one that's hidden unless we choose periodic, For the condition value, I have here where it says ZC display key underscore inspection underscore type is equal to the value periodic. Now let me break that down for you. I want to actually start here where it says inspection underscore type, and note that this value is the data column name of the element right above it. So the inspection type, that is the data column name for that element. Now, because that element is an option list, you before used the index to refer to each value. So the first value has an index of 0. The second value would have an index of 1. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm using another built-in function within iFormBuilder, the ZC display key, to use the key value rather than the index value of that option. And so when I define my option list, I set the key value as the word periodic in all lowercase. And so if I am to select that value, this would be true. The value of the inspection type would be equal to periodic. And because this expression evaluates to true within the condition value, this field will then be shown. So again, going back, if I'm here, if I choose this, the key value is the word acceptance, so my condition is false. As soon as I select periodic, the key value matches, the condition value is true, and the element is displayed. Okay. And for more information on ZC display keys, and there's also another function called ZC display value, I do have a link here to an article on our Customer Success Center for your reference. Before I get into the building information subform, Barrett, I wanted to again ping you to see if there are any questions that I may need to address or that people have.
The only question that recently came up that I thought would just be helpful to reiterate what you said is with the iFormBuilder built-in functions. They were wondering if that's the standard that you have to use that exact same wording and capitalization for it to work. And yes, that is what you have to use. I just thought that was a helpful question, just to remind others that not only was the built-in functions available for the first name and last name, but you can also use it for username and email address too. So definitely check that out if you're interested in learning more.
Yep, those are great tips, Barrett. Thank you so much. All right, so now talking about the building information subform, let me go ahead and show this to you, the enhancements that we're going to make. So when I click on building information, I'm going to load this form. And the enhancements that we made were regarding both the speed and the capacity of the elevator. So I'm going to focus on those. If I enter a value in for speed, say we have a negative value, say our elevator is going to move negative 10 feet per second, which doesn't really make sense. And its maximum capacity is going to be something like negative 100 pounds. Neither of these values make sense. If I try to submit this form, you'll see that I cannot submit this form. It says the form is saved as a draft, and it says to please re-enter the unit speed, which must be greater than 0. And it also says that negative 100 is not a valid weight capacity. So this right here is an example of using both the client validation as well as the validation message. So when we add in our client validation, this is going to be for the speed element. I'm going to type in the validation portion, speed is greater than 0. So again, just like the condition value, this needs to be true in order to move on. If that expression is false, then when I try to submit the form, the following validation message will be shown. And again, going back to what I said earlier to reiterate, it's really important to remember that you put plain text inside of quotation marks. If you don't do this, your message will not show up, and it can be confusing for the data collector. I also wanted to point out as a little tip that it's helpful sometimes to indicate the location of the element. So you don't want to just say something like speed greater than 0, right? You want to try to give the data collector some sense of where that element is within the form especially if you have a larger form, so that they know where to go to make that amendment. And so in this case, I'm doing that by saying that I want the unit speed to be greater than 0, rather than just saying, a value entered must be greater than 0. For the capacity field, I have a very similar validation. I want a positive number for this field. And in my validation message, I'm actually going to include the value that was entered using the data column name capacity. And then I'm going to say that capacity is not a valid weight capacity. And if we remember going back to my form, when I entered in the number -100, it said -100 is not a valid weight capacity. So again, using that plus sign, I'm joining two strings together. That's called concatenation. And I also want to make note that you want to be careful about the data types sometimes. So if you're collecting a number, but then you want to use the concatenation operator to push it together with a string, you have to make sure that you convert that value to a string value. And so that's what I'm doing here within this validation message using the string function. So I'm taking my numeric value of capacity, converting it to a string, and taking that string and concatenating it with the rest of my validation message text. For the final portion of the form, we're going to be going over the car inspection subform. And what I wanted to do with this form was go ahead and add in a pass-fail count and then have it hidden. So to start with, I actually have it visible so that you can see how this works down at the bottom. And so currently, as no fields are filled in, the number of passes, fails, and not applicables is 0. If I choose an element and I say the car ride has passed, that count increments to 1. If it has failed, fail would increment, and not applicable respectively. As I start to fill this out, you can see the count changes, and I'll continue to fill this out. And again, as I said earlier, there were 19 total points that were for this inspection. And after I filled them all out, I go to the bottom. 13 have passed, 3 have failed, and 3 are not applicable. My total sum is 19 for all of these elements. Okay. And then I can click on Done, and these values are submitted. So this one's going to be probably the most difficult to explain. So Barrett, please, if anyone has any questions, stop me immediately, and I'll be happy to go over whatever their question is.
Not a problem.
So the first thing I wanted to show was a table view of the elements within this form. And I also wanted to note that this screenshot is taken from the new form builder. And I actually use this view quite a bit. Being able to see all of the elements in a more condensed format is really helpful when you're building out your forms. Now I have this column here highlighted, which is the data column name. Let me actually go ahead and maximize this. So the data column name is highlighted because those are the values I'm going to be using to reference that element. So if I want to reference the value that was chosen for the ventilation, I have to use the data column name that's associated with that field. If I want to check the value for the car ride, I would use that value car_ride, which is the data column name for that element. Now, knowing that there are 19 points of inspection, I then wrote a custom page-level JavaScript function to check each one of them. What you're going to see here is a couple of things. The first part of this function is the name, which is called result count. That is the name of my function, and anytime I want to use the function, I'm going to refer to it by its name. After the opening parentheses, you'll see the word check, and that is going to correspond to what I'm looking for. So that's going to be my positive value. If I'm looking for a pass, then I will put in a 0 for that value because it is the first in the list of yes or pass, fail, not applicable. So it has an index of 0. Similarly, if I want to fail, I would put in a 1, and if I want not applicable, I would put in a 2. The letters here, A through S at the top, correspond to the 19 different inspection points that I have in my subform. And then within the actual function itself, I'm going to set a counter equal to 0, so I'm assuming that the count is 0 to begin with. And I'm going to go through each one of those inspection points and check to see if it matches what I'm looking for. If it does, I'm going to increment my counter by 1. That's what this text here where it says counter plus plus means. That just means to increment that variable by 1. After I've gone through the entire list, I'll return whatever value I have for counter, and then that is what will be displayed as my dynamic value. Also, I have a link on this slide here to this page-level JavaScript function. So if you want to reference this later on, I actually have this function posted online, so you don't need to necessarily keep the PDF or this link next to you. If you want to go to that page and bookmark it for future reference, feel free to do so. The third part of this is looking at the actual element where I'm putting in the values. So what I have here is I have my pass count selected, and notice that it's a read-only field, meaning it can't be edited. For the dynamic value, what I'm doing is I'm calling my function result count. That first 0 is going to refer to the fact that I'm counting my number of passes. And if you remember what I said, where the index for pass is a 0, that's why I've entered the integer 0 there. After that, I have a long list of all the different data column names separated by commas. And so basically what will happen is door reopening device will be assigned to the variable A. Stop switches will be assigned to the variable B within the function, and so on throughout the entire list. Once those indexes are passed to the function, it goes through the checks, it increments counter, and then it will return that value, which is then displayed as the dynamic value within the element. And the final point here is also that if I want to have this field hidden, I can set the condition value equal to false so that it is not shown to the user. Barrett, any questions from anybody?
There was a question about how to try to eliminate errors when copying data column names. And my suggestion, and John, you probably would agree with this as well, but when you're doing smart controls that require that you copy data column names, it's actually easier to do this process when you go in the table view of the form builder, the updated and new and improved form builder, because that way you can go back and forth with copying and pasting in one page instead of having to scroll up and down. So John, if you don't mind showing exactly when you're in the table view how they can bring up the dynamic value, condition value, and all the smart controls in that table to be able to see this a little bit better.
No problem. So yeah, so all I did here at the top of my form builder is the form builder defaults to this view here where it gives you a rendering of a device as well as the different forms that you have. By clicking on this, you can select the pane to choose to add elements. But this third option here is going to be my table view. And within my table view, you're able to choose which columns you want displayed. So if I want to have, for example, the label hidden, so I only see the data column name, and I want to see something like the dynamic value and the condition value, I can do this within this view. If I scroll down here, you'll see this is the pass count field, and I have my dynamic value, which is my JavaScript function, as well as my condition value here, which is set to false. For example, if I go back to my parent form here, where I had these two subforms, I have the condition value here set to the unit type not equaling -1, as well as the inspection type not equaling -1, and these correspond to these two select fields. So if I go back here, right? If these two fields are not selected, basically, the condition fails. And so once they're selected and they have an index value that is not negative, then my condition value passes, and then these two subforms will be shown. Okay. Barrett, if there are any other final questions anyone might have towards the end of this webinar, I again apologize about the form not syncing properly. But if there are any questions I can address within these last couple of minutes, I'd be happy to.
So far, there isn't any questions coming in, but we have a couple more minutes. So if those of you who have been hesitant to ask questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and John is here to answer them for you. While we have a second, I do want to remind everybody we have our certification program, our FormBuilder certification. And this past week, this whole week we've been doing the recertification for those individuals who got certified in the last year. But if you're interested in learning more with form building and becoming a more advanced form builder, I highly suggest that you sign up for our November form builder certification, which is the second week of November. It is a little later in the day, so it's for those Australia groups or those late night owls on the US side.
And also, Barrett, while we give people a chance to see if they have any questions that they might want to ask, I do want to launch one last poll here. And the poll is going to ask you, based on the demo that you just saw, what topics you'd like to learn more about. And so the viewers can answer this. One of the things that I do like to try to do with my webinars is, based on the feedback I get from attendees, I would like to be able to then take that into account when thinking about what other topics we can cover in future webinars. So if there are things that you want to learn more about, be sure to let us know, and I will make sure that they are in future webinars as primary topics.
All right, well, while everyone's responding to that poll, there was another question that came in, and it was about the iFormBuilder.firstname and iFormBuilder.lastname built-in functions not working or not showing up within the iForm app. When you first put those built-in functions in the form, you actually sometimes need to clean the local database within the iForm app. So when you have iForm open, if you go into the settings, you'll see a button that says Clean Local Database. If you click that button, then resync your form, hopefully the first name and last name will then appear. You also have to be aware that the capitalization needs to match perfectly for the username, the way that you actually created the username for the first name and last name built-in functions to work too. We have a couple articles on this, and hopefully what I just mentioned will help you troubleshoot, but if you still have issues, John or myself are always readily available to help you, but we also have our Customer Success Center, which has agents on chat almost all hours of the day.
Yep. It looks like most everyone has voted on this poll. I'm going to go ahead and leave it open for a couple more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and close it. Looking at the results, it looks like a fair number of people are interested in the iFormBuilder built-in functions, as well as page-level JavaScript and also the ZC display key built-in function. And so what we'll do is we'll take this into account. We'll go back, and perhaps the next webinar topic will be sure to highlight these topics in that content. Okay. To close things out, I do want to briefly talk about the different support options you have as you continue in your form building adventures and learn to develop better data collection. We offer a wide range of support for you. I'll begin with the Customer Success Center because honestly that really should be your first stop for any questions that you have. The Customer Success Center has a wide range of articles on different topics, ranging from guided tutorials to discussions on individual content areas that you may find useful, and introductory content for things like JavaScript. Also, continue to tune into our webinars. We're trying to hold them as frequently as possible, and as I stated earlier, with your feedback, we're able to customize these to meet your needs. As Barrett alluded to, also we have our recertifications, and another part of that is the certification course is under the umbrella of what we call our iFormBuilder Academy, and those are going to be lessons and training available for you to become more proficient within the platform. Also, one of the things I'm real proud about here is that we have a very strong and robust community around our software. And so a lot of times we'll have people from different organizations who are either sharing their solutions on the community forums, or they are helping other people who are running into problems that are similar to their experiences. And so if you want to interact with our community, be sure to check that out. We also offer a range of project services where our team can help your organization with the form building if needed, both through support as well as the actual development and the implementation of your projects. And then finally, the last point, and it's not necessarily a point of support, but I think that it's good to keep abreast of it, is to follow our release notes. So we're constantly evolving and upgrading and trying to improve our software, whether it's iFormBuilder on iOS or on Android. We also are offering a lot of new services such as our sandbox service, report, data flow automation, and all of these different services are constantly being updated. So by following the release notes, you'll be up to date with where we are and the changes that have been made to each of the different pieces of software. Okay. And again, I want to thank you all for attending this webinar. In the next 48 hours, you're going to be getting an email. Within that email, you'll have access to a recording of this session. You'll also get access to this to a PDF version of what I just presented to you, as well as links to all of the form packages that I went through today. So both the basic elevator inspection as well as the enhanced version with the smart controls. Barrett, if there are not any final questions, we can go ahead and close this webinar out for today.
Sure. Well, thank you, John. I thought you did a great job with that form. I think, and with the whole training, there were some great questions. So thank you from the customers and users who participated with those questions. And I'll go ahead and close everything. But thanks again, John.